everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for coming to Nestle's first Brown Bag event, put together by Dr. Carolyn Quam and grad student Sarah Elkinton. We will begin by sharing a 20-minute pre-recorded video supplied by Sarah on the topic of processing and attrition of tone and vowel in Mandarin-English bilinguals of varying proficiency, followed by a Q&A session with our wonderful participants, Dr. Quam and Sarah. Please feel free to type your questions in the chat box as you watch the video, and we will be sure to get those answered once the Q&A portion begins. If you would rather ask your questions verbally, or if you would prefer to use the chat box function during the Q&A portion, we will also be calling on those folks in the order in which they are received. To ask your question verbally, we ask that you raise your hand via Zoom. In order to do this, just make sure you have the chat box open and the participants button of the bottom of the Zoom app clicked on. And in the top of the chat box, you should see the raise hand function along with a few others. And if you need a refresher on what we've asked you to do here, don't worry about it because I will be putting all of this information in the chat box for y'all to review as needed. Before we start this video, Dr. Quam has some awesome, helpful information to share with everyone here. So take it away, Dr. Quam.
Thank you, Christina. Thanks so much for coming, everyone. I just wanted to give you a little bit of background on this recorded talk. So this started as the undergraduate honors thesis that Sarah Elkinton completed working in my research lab, the Child Language Learning Center in the department. Sarah wrote a really wonderful thesis with 2 experiments looking at this question of, congrats, Sarah, looking at this question of tone and vowel processing in Mandarin-English bilinguals. And so then we submitted her thesis study to the Boston University Conference on Language Development, and it was accepted for an oral presentation, which will be happening in just a couple weeks in the early part of November. So that's really exciting. And so that's what Sarah recorded this video for. So we wanted to take the opportunity to make it available to the department as well. But I also wanted to give a plug for the conference because I found out recently that attendance at the conference is free this year to students because it's a virtual event. And so you can actually, pre-registration ends today for faculty and non-students, but it actually, the freeness for students, the free rate actually continues after today. So I'm going to put the link to the registration in the chat box. So this is a conference that focuses on language development. A lot of it's focused on children, and a lot of it's focused on sort of basic science questions like language development and typically developing children. But there are usually some clinical topics, like one that I see commonly is like looking at vocabulary development in late talking children. That's a common one I see there. So there's a lot you can learn from that conference. And Sarah will be giving this same presentation. So the same recording will play at the conference. So there's a link to the registration. Hopefully you can see that in the chat. The conference is happening November 5th through 8th, I think it is. And because this is kind of it's a first presentation before the conference, we would love for you to ask lots of hard questions to help us prepare for the Q&A. So at the conference, there's going to be, just like this, there's going to be a presentation of the recording and then like a live Q&A. So we are going to be fielding a lot of questions from other scientists at the conference. So get ready. I see Christina getting ready to hopefully to write down some hard questions. Thank you. So I just wanted to make that request. Okay. That's all I wanted to say. Thanks, Christina.
Hello, thank you for coming to this talk, Processing and Attrition of Tone and Vowels in Mandarin-English Bilinguals. My name is Sarah Elkinton. I'm presenting on behalf of a group of authors based primarily out of the Child Language Learning Center at Portland State University. Since we're talking about Mandarin-English bilinguals, we need to talk for a minute about lexical tone. It's something that occurs in Mandarin and not in English, meaning that the pitch contour of the word changes the meaning of the word. So in Mandarin, ma and ma refer to 2 different things. with the dipping tone, ma, it refers to horse. You can see that on the left here. In ma, it refers, the high steady tone, it refers to mother. In Mandarin, in pinyin, you can write a number after a syllable to indicate what tone it is. There are 4 tones. Compare this with the ma, ma, and ma to ma and ma in English. One has a rising tone, one has a flat tone. Both refer to mother. As a quick aside, I do not speak Mandarin. I have been coached, but errors in pronunciation are mine alone, not indicative of a failure on the part of the research. Thank you. So this research study comes out of a word recognition task published in 2017 by Drs. Quam and Creel. They showed Mandarin-English bilinguals 2 pictures that differed in tone or vowel, or tone and vowel, and found that when the pictures differed just in tone, people were slower and less accurate choosing the picture that they wanted, that was requested. Mandarin dominant bilinguals also performed better than their English dominant peers, but only when everyone had to rely on tone to identify the correct picture. This finding asks the question, of course, why? Why is this? Is it something about tone? Or is it that English exposure reinforced the vowel contrasts that were tested in the experiment? So 2 new experiments were designed. Experiment 1 is a replication. Experiment 2 was an extension designed to look closer at why this was the why of this finding. So experiment 1 was a replication using the same 28 stimuli words. The stimuli words were divided into groups of 4 that had 2 words with the same vowel but differed in tone, and 2 words that had the same tone but differed in vowel. And finally, they had words that differed in tone and vowel and all had the same beginning part. So each of these 3 trial types were shown to the participants, and they were asked to choose one. All the pictures appeared equally often as target and distractor, and looking to see what happened. Since this was a replication study, we had some ideas of what to expect. The 2 big things were we were expecting to find a significant effect of trial type with the lowest performance in tone differentiated trials, and a significant interaction of language dominance and trial type that showed English dominant bilinguals being outperformed by their Mandarin dominant peers, but only when tone differentiated trials were involved. As in the original experiment, participants were shown 2 pictures and asked to click on one. The computer program recorded how accurate they were in their clicking, how fast they were in their clicking, and then a camera that was part of the experimental setup recorded where they were looking over the course of each trial. The eye tracking computer is fairly interesting. It uses a target on the forehead and reflection off of your cornea and where your pupil is to track where the participants are looking on the screen, whether they're looking at the asked for picture, the target, or the competitor distraction picture, or somewhere else on the screen entirely. This information was used to calculate what we call target advantage, which is a measure of how much more likely a person was to look at the target at any given time point. So we had 61 people in the study. Statistically, they were very similar to the people in the original study. LP were above 0.8 for paired t-test in the language measures. And like in the original study, they were also English dominant. So we used 3 language measures to determine language dominance. One was a picture naming task that started with very simple basic words, sun, rainbow, butterfly, and got more complicated, ending with words like axle, manometer, pressure gauge, and mortar and pestle. Participants went through those images in English and Mandarin. We swapped, mixing the order. And this was then used to generate these graphs here. So you can see that they're basically equivalent in terms of experiment 1 and the original study. The other two measures we used to look at English dominance were the bilingual dominance scale. It's a self-reported language use survey, and the age of arrival in an English-speaking country. All of these measures agreed that these participants were English dominant. So we started by analyzing accuracy, participant clicking accuracy. How often were they clicking on the right, the asked for picture? Here we're showing tone trials in blue and vowel trials in orange. And we split the group in half based on their language profile. So we have the more dominant group and the more Mandarin dominant group and the more English dominant group. We found a significant main effect of trial type and an interaction between trial type and language dominance. You can see this interaction here on the right of the graph in the blue versus the orange. Orange being vowels and blue being tone. You can see that there's a significant difference between the two. This might look really dramatic, but in the interest of good presentation etiquette, this graph starts at 95%. The difference is still statistically significant, but it's easier to visualize this way. These graphs also show accuracy in the participants, but here you can see clearly that because these are graphed as clicking accuracy as the y-axis and Mandarin dominance, which we used because it was very clearly understandable. So we took, for these, after we had them do the naming tasks, we subtracted the Mandarin number of answers correct in Mandarin from the numbers of answers correct in the English naming task, and got a what we call the MINT dominance score, or Mandarin dominance. In this case, a 0 would represent a perfectly balanced bilingual, and a negative number would represent an English dominant bilingual, and a Mandarin dominant individual would have a positive number, with the bigger the number, the absolute distance from 0 being the bigger the difference. So here we have English dominant on the left of the side of the graph, and as you can see with this correlation, as Mandarin dominance increases, accuracy increases too. On the right, in the vowel graph, you can see that there's really no correlation between the English dominant and the Mandarin dominant participants. The other measure we're talking about in this talk, is eye gaze, which was calculated by how often the participant was looking at the target and how often the participant was looking at the competitor, and subtracting the looks to the competitor from the looks to target. So this would mean that a 1 would be looking exclusively at target, and a 0 is chance looking over at a given time. So we looked from 50 milliseconds to 800 milliseconds in 50 millisecond intervals and plotted the results as you can see here. Orange is vowels and blue is tone. So as time goes on, as time passes from the request, more and more people are looking at the correct target. The likelihood of the person looking at the correct target increases, but it takes people a little bit longer to look at the correct target in tone trials. Here again, we can see this not over time. This is target advantage, so how it looks to target minus looks to competitor as a function of English dominance or Mandarin dominance. So on the left, in the tone trial condition, when the two pictures differed only in tone, you can see that as you get more Mandarin dominant, your accuracy, your looks to target increase. In vowel trials, it also increases, but not as much, and it doesn't reach the threshold for statistical significance. So overall, the key findings replicated. Performance was worse in tone differentiated trials for accuracy and gaze. And clicking accuracy and target advantage in tone differentiated trials was correlated with Mandarin dominance, meaning that English dominant individuals did not perform as well as their Mandarin dominant peers, but only in the tone differentiated trials. That overall is what we expected. There were two explanations for this. One is that some researchers suggest lexical tone may be stored and accessed separately from consonants and vowels. The other explanation was that Mandarin vowel contrasts that were tested were easily assimilable into English vowel contrasts. This is being based on the works of the perceptual assimilation model, Catherine Best's work. Put a pin in that idea. We'll be back to visit it again in a minute. The main question between these two explanations is, did the overlap between Mandarin and English vowels protect the vowels from attrition? This is an English language vowel chart, but I've added in the two Mandarin sounds that don't exist. One is this two-story A, the other is rounded schwa. Overall, though, you can see there's a very high overlap between the English vowels and the Mandarin vowels that were tested. The two vowel sounds that don't occur in English were never tested against each other, so you could always be processing the sounds through your English vowel categories and be accurate. The perceptual assimilation model calls this what we call an easy comparison. They call a two-category assimilation. This is in contrast to what we call a medium comparison that is called a goodness of fit assimilation, where you have a sound that is clearly in Mandarin and not quite in English. So in Mandarin, there's the sound O, we have that in English, and then Mandarin has the sound it's an unrounded O, and English has schwa, carrot, where is not quite but it's not too far off. That's a goodness of fit. Compare that to what we consider to be the hard comparison, where both Mandarin sounds are assimilated into a single English category. So English has E and English has U, and Mandarin has both of those. But Mandarin also has U. It's a high front, it's E with your lips rounded. Or U, but you move your tongue forward. You can say it, describe it either way. So if you compare E to U, well, is it more like E or is it more like U? That's the question. So we're looking specifically at E, U, and the unrounded front vowel and the unrounded O. The idea being that these vowels do not occur in English. So comparing U to E or U would be single category assimilation in the perceptual assimilation model, these vowels could therefore show the same attrition effects that tones would be showing. So we set up a new experiment. We took this list of words that included the vowels U and E comparison and U and U comparison, and came up with a list of new words. We had 97 words that were sorted into pairs to capture the tone or the vowel separation. So far, we have tested 31 people in this experiment. However, just because of the population changes, we do not have the same sort of high English, low Mandarin scores as were in the original study and experiment 1. This is showing accuracy by trial type. There are currently no significant differences in trial type by accuracy. The difference between tone and easy vowels is approaching significance, but has not reached the significance threshold yet. As you plot accuracy as a function of Mandarin dominance, again, this is looking at Mandarin confrontational naming, picture naming minus English picture naming. You can see there's no real correlation here either. Looking at eye gaze over time, so this is looks to target minus looks to competitor. In gray, we see the tone trials that are, again, a little bit slower in terms of achieving target fixation, 1 being complete looks to target at a given time, 0 being chance looking. You can see that tone is a little bit slower off the mark than either easy vowels in yellow or hard vowel comparisons in blue. Looking at this as a function of Mandarin dominance, you can see that there are no significant correlations in terms of performance. So we have seen to date no significant differences in accuracy by trial type, something we found in the experiment 1 and the original study, and no significant differences in target advantage, so looks to target in any trial type, which is again something that was found in the original and experiment 1. There's also no effective language dominance in any trial condition, again, something that we expected to see. However, all of this is not to say that the experiment is gone horribly off the works, just that because the average Mandarin dominance is much higher in experiment 2. The people are just more English, are just more Mandarin dominant. There's also much low variance in terms of Mandarin ability than in the experiment 1 or the original study. So after the university says it's safe, we're going to go back into the lab and recruit more people, get more people to come. We're only at about half of our target sample size. We were aiming for about 60 participants, which is, akin to the experiment 1. Specifically, we're looking to recruit more English dominant participants so that we can have a truly comparable population sample to be looking at. So in the Child Language Learning Center, the lab that this research was done at, we're looking at bilingualism in perceptual advantages that might go along with being a bilingual for children with and without developmental language disorder. And we're looking at incorporating qualitative approaches to bring in sort of the whole picture of what it means to be losing, to have language attrition, especially in a heritage language. So we care about this because the lab, the Child Language Learning Center, and the researchers position this research positions language as a dynamic system where things are always changing. The phonological processing is always changing in the individual, depending on what kind of input they get. So this research helps us look at what are the implications of having loss in your first language. Here are the references that I've talked about. Over the course of the slide, these slides will be available. And I would like to thank all of my coworkers and mentors and everyone who has come to the labs to participate in this study. And thank you for your time. And I believe after this, I will be available to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Hey, thank you so much, Dr. Quam and Sarah, for sharing all of this with us. I'm really excited to ask you some of the really thoughtful questions that participants may have, as well as myself. And as a reminder to everyone here, if you would like to ask a follow-up question, you can do so via the chat box, or you could also do it verbally by using the raise hand function on Zoom. If you're not familiar with that, you just click on the participant button at the bottom as well as the chat box, and the raise hand function should be right there, and we will call on y'all in the order that questions are received. Yeah, thank you so much. I had no idea about any of this before watching it. So I learned a lot in just 20 minutes. So I really appreciate it. Thank you again. And yeah, so I want to open it up for questions. Like I said, please feel free to um, ask in the chat box or raise your hand.
I realized while people are thinking of questions, I just wanted to acknowledge our collaborators, because I think we forgot to say that. I forgot to say that at the beginning. So Diana Yoon is another master student who has worked on this project. Judith Kelholt was a visiting student from the Netherlands, who is another co-author. And then Sarah Creel from UC San Diego is another faculty collaborator. So I wanted to acknowledge them. They also helped us put this talk together.
All right. So any questions? Dr. Quam and Sarah Elkinton would love for you to ask any questions that came up while watching the video. The tougher the better, but also like if you just want clarification on something. I'm like a big note taker, so I took some notes too. So I mean, but even if you didn't, you know, if you would just like I said, like clarification. Like I guess one thing that I'm interested in personally is so for the first there were 3 experiments total, the first one, right? And then the second one that replicated it, and then the third one that was an extension. And the second experiment, the replication found had findings that were very similar to the one from the original experiment, and the third that extended on that seemed to have different findings. And I know this was addressed a little bit in the video, but would either Dr. Quam or Sarah mind giving me a little bit of more information or recasted information about how that happened?
It's not so much that we found different things. It's just that we haven't completed recruiting and testing people yet. So far in experiment 2, there are 31 participants. That's half of the number of people who were tested in the first experiment I talked about, and less than half of the number of people who were tested in the original published experiment. So it's not really that things haven't been found, it's just that things aren't done yet. Like if you look at a cake halfway through being baked, of course it's going to look different.
Totally. No, that makes a lot of sense. And then I did like remember hearing at the end of the video as well, you talking about like how in the next experiment, your group is going to be searching for more English dominant bilinguals as well for that too.
Yeah, just so that everything is more comparable, because if we find one thing with an English dominant sample and another thing with a Mandarin dominant sample of bilinguals, I mean, is the finding due to, you know, something about the people? Well, we don't know. You want things to be as comparable as possible across studies. So like I said, halfway through recruitment, so we still have time to get the populations to mirror each other.
That's awesome. And I'm really excited to learn about the follow-up study as well when like that's done. Thank you.
Clarify something related to that, that in the talk you referred to the participants in the original published study and then experiment 1 of this new research. You referred to the participants as English dominant. And I just wanted to clarify for people that we don't mean, when Sarah says that the group is English dominant, she doesn't mean that everyone in the sample is English dominant. There's a wide variation. So there were people who were balanced bilinguals, there were people who were English dominant and people who were Mandarin dominant. And if you look at the graphs, I don't know if so normally in a Q&A you can like pull up the slides, Sarah, and that's something I'm wondering about for the conference talk, is like if there's going to be a way to do that or not. But like if you can just try try to remember those, there were these like scatter plots that were kind of boomerang shaped, where it was showing people's, Sarah's gonna pull it up, thank you. Oh, great. Yeah, it was showing people's like language dominance profiles, and you could see that there was a wide variety, especially in the first 2 experiments. Yeah, so the sample as a whole was English dominant, but there were many different profiles, and that's what you see with all the spread in those dots across the spectrum of Mandarin and English proficiency. So the issue with the new data, again, the new sample, it's not that there's no variability, it's just there's quite a bit less, and the sample as a whole is more skewed toward Mandarin dominance, whereas the previous 2 were slightly skewed toward English dominance.
Okay, yeah, and that'll be nice too to have, you know, with the third research study that y'all are going to do, having you know, the split. Yeah, and I'm curious to see how that's going to go. Thank you so much for your thoughtful answers to my questions for clarification. And we do have someone with their hand raised. Molly Franz would like to ask a question. So Molly, off to you.
Thanks for this wonderful presentation. And my question is, there are many, I'm wondering, so a lot of the people that, I'm guessing that a lot of the participants were from, we had relationship to mainland China perhaps, and many people from various Chinese speaking communities also speak other Chinese languages. And I'm wondering how you handled the influence of other Chinese languages in considering Mandarin dominance versus whatever other tonal language dominance. Is that a clear enough question?
Yes, and the short version of that is every time we get someone whose first language was one of the many dialects that exist in China, we would have a conference about, well, is this in like the same family as Mandarin? Can we include this person? Because we really wanted, the goal of the study is to have people who Mandarin, like Putonghua, I think is the Mandarin name for, is their first language, not necessarily like any of the other myriad of dialects and languages that exist within China. And so that's something that we look at the BDS scores, the survey of like, when did you start learning languages, and talked about pretty much every time it came up, because we're still working on clear, concise guidelines.
Yeah, and I'll just add that I know you'll have to correct me, Sarah, if what I'm saying doesn't apply to what we've been doing at PSU, but I know in this line of research, what we've done is we'll have people fill out the bilingual dominance scale, which is a set of 12 questions about their language history and current language use, but it doesn't go into a lot of depth on their language history. And when we ask about different languages, people don't always immediately think of different Chinese dialects as different languages. So we also have them fill out like additional, we have them do these sort of boxes where they get to select their, they get to divide their life into time frames, so that they're deciding, like, you know, we're not imposing a structure on it. They get to decide sort of like, okay, well, before I was 5 and went to kindergarten, like I'm going to treat that as like one time frame when I got this particular language input. And then we have them fill in like try to estimate the percentage of input in different languages and dialects. And we make it really clear that like on the form and verbally that they should treat different Chinese dialects as, you know, they should put everything down. So so we have some participants typically who are from Taiwan and they may have been exposed to Taiwanese, so that we encourage them to put that down. Shanghainese would, all those different dialects would go on the form. And then typically we've excluded participants who had, like in any of those timeframes that they report, that, that they divide up, if they had if they had more exposure to any other dialects of Chinese than to Mandarin, or like Sarah was saying, those dialects that are very closely related, that sort of fall within that Mandarin umbrella, then they would be excluded. Sarah, does that match what we've, yeah, that matches what we've been doing. Okay, good.
All right, thank you so much for that. That is not something that even occurred to me, Molly. So thank you for asking that. But yeah, like China has tons of dialects, in different languages too. So yeah, that's a really important thing to control for. So good question. And thank you, Dr. Quam and Sarah, for answering so thoughtfully and helpfully. And Dr. Amy Donaldson would like to ask a question. So we're going to go to Dr. Donaldson.
Hi, so I am traveling and my connection has been poor, so I apologize if someone's already asked about this, or you spoke about it in the presentation. But Sarah, I believe you mentioned at the end that you're interested in qualitative measures as well, and using qualitative methodology. So I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that.
That is actually something that I don't know a lot about. I know it's something the lab is working on. So I think Dr. Quam is more suited to answer that question than I am.
So thank you, Amy. We haven't collected any of our own qualitative data yet, but we started that research last school year with Maggie Hess, who was doing her culminating project in the master's program. And she and some other students in the lab began a systematic review of the literature on attrition, on heritage language maintenance and attrition. So we've been engaging in the systematic review of the research that's already out there, with a particular focus on factors that impact heritage language maintenance and attrition. And the factors that we were looking at in particular include parents' beliefs about sort of whether the heritage language, whether speaking and maintaining the heritage language would confer benefits to their children. Also, whether the language, how the language is viewed in society. So whether the heritage language is viewed as sort of a language that carries prestige or tends to be stigmatized. And also one piece that we're particularly interested in is contextual factors. Oh, did we lose Amy? I think we might have.
Oh, I think you're right.
Okay, well, I'll keep talking for everyone else's benefit.
Yeah, I'm still curious, so please go on.
I can call Amy in later, but yeah, so we're also interested in the context in which parents are making choices about language input to their children. So in the field that I was trained in, child language development, there's a lot of research looking at parents' choices about language input. That's a good point, Curtis. Yeah, there will be a recorded video for anyone who didn't see the beginning. And yeah, so the research, actually, our lab group gave a colloquium last spring that I think you were at, Christina, that was focused on this other line of research we have that's a collaboration with somebody at the WIC program, Women, Infants, and Children, yeah, the nutrition focused program. So we talked a lot about it there as well, but a lot of the research looking at parents' input to children is, we feel, takes a fairly deficit-based kind of approach, sort of critiquing the ways that parents interact with their children. And we wanted to just approach that differently by looking at like not just critiquing and scrutinizing how parents talk to their children, but also looking at the broader context in which parents are living and families are living. And so the WIC program is, that's really compatible with the perspective of Julie Reeder, our collaborator at WIC, and because they're looking at supporting parents, and we're looking at sort of like how well do WIC staff support parents in language development topics. So it all kind of comes together there. So Julie is a collaborator on that systematic review as well. But we wanted to like learn more about like what's already known about how sort of, for example, the advice that parents get from health providers and like WIC staff and people like this, how that influences their choices. So for example, if a health provider expresses an attitude about the heritage language that's positive or negative, or if they make a statement about like their impressions about bilingualism, whether being bilingual and maintaining the heritage language is an advantage or a disadvantage for children, how do those statements impact parents' choices? So that's just to give a maybe not so quick overview of the factors that we're looking into in that review of the literature.
That is awesome. I just love that so much because like that is like so important, and I'm really curious to know about that as well. I'm raising my son monolingual. I would like to do bilingual, but he has an articulation disorder, and so I'm like holding off a little bit. But algún día, we'll do more Spanish. But yeah, so I haven't had that experience of being in a doctor's office and having the pediatrician either telling me that my native language is something that I shouldn't teach my child or hopefully should. But yeah, like so I'd be really curious to find out more about that, and I love how it all ties in together too. It's really cool.
That's what we're hoping is like Diana Yoon and Joey Lim, who are both in the master's program, are going to be trying to pull these like the qualitative the things we're learning from qualitative research and the quantitative approach that we've been engaging with more closely together. That's one of their goals in their culminating project in the master's program this year. Yeah, I also wanted to say, Christina, I'm glad you brought up the articulation disorder, because one of the things we do know from reviewing the literature from Betty Yu's work is that she looks in particular at parents' decisions about heritage language, like providing that input to their children after their child has received an autism diagnosis. That's one of the research studies that she's done, or one of the things she looks at. And she finds that there's like a particular impact, like so there's an interaction there, like when a child does receive some kind of diagnosis of disorder, then the parents tend to pull away from the heritage language at that point, which isn't necessarily actually like research-based or evidence-based, but that's what she sees in terms of families' behaviors. Oh, thank you. Molly just posted a link to her website. Yeah, Betty Yu is one of my like personal inspirations, because she gave a really amazing inspirational talk at, I mean, it wasn't intended as an inspirational talk. It just inspired me in my own research interests. But yeah, she does really cool research. And I was referring to a presentation she gave at the ASHA convention, I think in 2017.
Yeah, no, and that's really interesting too about the articulation disorder and like autism diagnoses as well, and different like language impairments or disorders, and the choice parents make in whether or not to go with their native language in addition to the language of the country that they're currently living in, like American, like English if you're in America. Yeah, like for me, I'm not a native Spanish speaker. My dad is from Venezuela, but he lost it growing up and stuff. But I'm very passionate about it, and I'm very passionate that I want my son to be bilingual. But hearing about the articulation disorder initially, like I just worry about it. I don't know, especially since I'm not like a native speaker, I'm like, I don't want to do this wrong while we're already working on English, I guess. But yeah, very, very good point. Thank you, Dr. Quam.
And there is also like, there's a difference too between like, there are families where they're speaking Spanish all the time and that's the native language of everyone in the family. and then they receive this diagnosis, and then suddenly they're feeling this pressure to do something really different that feels really unnatural. So that's not to say that that it can't be beneficial for children, like, you know, like in your family as well, to become bilingual. But it's important to, you know, to look carefully at each situation. I think the ones where at least for me personally, the ones where the family is like all native speakers of a heritage language, and then that doesn't get maintained, that seems particularly sad to me. But I'm also speaking as somebody who, like you, like I'm not a native speaker of Spanish, but I learned it when I was 6 years old. And so I still have that like emotional attachment to this language of my childhood and of my schools growing up, you know. So yeah, it's so interesting to look at what's similar and what's different across all those different situations and cases.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you so much, Dr. Quam and Sarah, for being here today and for answering like everyone's questions and for putting together this presentation. Like, it's just been such a wonderful experience. And before I go on to our closing statement, I wanted to ask Sarah and Dr. Quam if y'all have anything you would like to add, or any wrapping up points that you would like to make before we let these folks go. All right. Well, thank you so much. And yeah, that's the end of the Q&A. And yeah, thank you so much to everyone for being here. And just, I know it's like the millionth time I've said it, but like, thank you again to Sarah and Dr. Quam for being here, putting this together, like Sarah for like putting that video together, and for like also like sharing that with us, answering our questions, you know, adding more, like, just, I've had a really good time, and I'm really excited to learn more about this too in my future studies, as well as after y'all have this next research study like squared away, and the other research too. I'm really excited about it. Yeah, and so to everyone else, I just wanted to say thank you from everyone on the Nestle board for being here, and I really hope to see all of y'all at our next Brown Bag event. And if you're interested, we have an undergrad speech and hearing student actually who is new, I believe, this year, named Carissa Stonick. And she will be speaking on medical chart biases. And that event will be taking place on Tuesday, October 27th at 4 p.m. And I'm really excited to attend. She's had some firsthand experience with that she'll be talking about, which I think is really important. And I'm also going to link our website in the chat right now, pdxnesla.com. I almost put edu, but it's not edu. pdxnesla.com. And that way you can be current on our events, what we are about, how to be more involved, and reach out or sign up. And yeah, thank you so much to everyone for being here. Appreciate all of y'all.
Thanks so much
Thank you.
for hosting.